Stories making headlines this hour. South Korea gives the North an ultimatum, offering the regime a final chance to hold talks over the fate of a shuttered joint industrial zone, suggesting it may permanently close down the factory if the negotiations fail. Now, lingering economic uncertainties push Korea's business confidence for July to the lowest level in 6 months. This only days after Seoul policymakers welcome signs of recovery and promise steps to stoke growth. Plus, Israel and Palestine are set to resume peace talks in Washington for the first time in 3 years, after the Israeli cabinet gives the green light to release more than 100 Palestinian prisoners, clearing the last hurdle for the talks. But these stories and more are next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, July 29th. Live from Seoul, I'm Geunhye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the latest in inter-Korean relations. The ball is now in North Korea's court after Seoul gave Pyongyang a final chance for talks over the suspended Kaesong Joint Factory Zone.
Experts say South Korea is suggesting it may permanently close down the factory if the negotiations fail. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports on the dialogue still stuck in limbo.
North Korea did not give an answer on Monday to what the South calls its final proposal for talks regarding the normalization of the Kaesong industrial complex. Seoul's Unification Ministry said it offered to hold a 7th round of working-level talks to the North through their inter-Korean hotline on Monday morning. The ministry said it did not lay out when and where the meeting should take place, but requested a swift response. The two Koreas have held 6 rounds of working-level talks this month on reopening the business park, but the two have so far failed to narrow their differences. Seoul has demanded safeguards against future closures before reopening the complex, while Pyongyang has pushed for an immediate, unconditional resumption of operations.
It is important for the two Koreas to cooperate in developing the Kaesong Industrial Complex into an internationally competitive business park. In order for us to do that, it's essential to ensure that there will never be a repeat of the incidents that we saw in March and April of this year.
While the South has warned of grave measures if its proposal goes unanswered by the North, experts say chances for concrete progress in the talks are slim, with Seoul showing no sign of change in its own stance. They say without any compromises from the South, North Korea will not be positive about the idea of implementing safeguards against future closures of the complex. But some remain upbeat about Pyongyang's response, saying that the North may not want to let go of the joint business park, a source of hard currency for the cash-strapped nation. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
For an expert's take on the ongoing Kaesong impasse, Dr. Choi Gang, Vice President of Asan Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio to tell us more about the current situation unfolding on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, Dr. Che, over the weekend, South Korea made its final offer to Pyongyang for talks on the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Last week, North Korea threatened to turn it into a military base. Both sides seem really set in their position. Is there any room for compromise?
By taking those two positions, I don't think there is any room for the compromise at the moment. But I think as time goes by, there's room for the resumption of the talks. But actually, because it is the toughness of both sides, has created some impasse. So at this point of time, neither side is able to make a concession from their previous position. So for example, South Korea clearly demanded for the pledge of North Korean pledge for not for the prevention of the similar cases in the future, but North Korea refused to do so. So unless North Korea makes some pledge on that fact, I don't think it's possible for South Korea to make any kinds of concession to North Korea.
If history is any guide, next month's joint military exercise between the United States and South Korea may make Pyongyang less agreeable to talks, not just the Kaesong. So do you see a resolution in inter-Korean feud being pushed back even further?
I think this, because actually North Korea will use that exercise as an excuse for not returning to the talks. So they will criticize both the United States and South Korea for increasing the tension on the Korean Peninsula. They will use that under that kinds of circumstances, they would not be able to come back to the negotiation table. So, but actually, as time goes by, as I said before, so maybe North Korea will think of returning to the talks from the beginning of mid-September or early October after the consulting with China, because China is pretty much concerned with the increasing tension on the Korean Peninsula. China will press North Korea to be more reconciliatory to the outside world and also maybe to mediate the position between the two sides, I mean the South Korea and North Korea.
Also, over the weekend, North Korea held its Victory Day parade, but unlike in the past, there were no new weapons on display prominently. Is this a sign that it's willing to be more cooperative?
No, I don't think so, because actually they brought out all the new weapon systems they have acquired for the past several years. So actually, not appearing of new weapon system does not necessarily mean that North Korea is willing to come back to the negotiation table or to be more reconciliatory. Actually, it was designed to boost up the Kim Jong-un's leadership domestically, as well as to show this North Korea's readiness to cope with external threat. So actually, so it is not necessarily the sign of reconciliation or sign of this intention for the negotiation.
I mean, we've seen reports about former U.S. President Jimmy Carter planning his visit to Pyongyang very soon for the release of Kenneth Bae. Last time he went, he failed to meet with Kim Jong-un. Do you think he'll be able to do so this time around? And if so, what sort of message will he deliver?
First of all, let me make it clear. Former President Carter does not have U.S. government blessing at all. He is visiting Pyongyang in his own private capacity. So I don't think he's entitled to carry any kinds of message from the U.S. government at all. So maybe he will be used by North Korea as a kind of messenger. But I don't know whether he will meet Kim Jong-un or not. Maybe there's a high possibility for President Carter to meet Kim Jong-nam, not Kim Jong-un. So, but on the, actually, Kim Jong-nam will say because of this hostile environment that North Korea cannot come back to the negotiation table. We want to have a direct talk with the United States. That kinds of message, the message North Korea has been delivering to the United States, will be reiterated once again. But nothing new, serious message, because actually North Korea knows that Jimmy Carter does not have any authority to mediate this case.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing your insights with us tonight.
Thank you.
President Park Geunhye is off on a 5-day summer vacation starting this Monday.
It's her first holiday since she took office on February 25th, but some at the presidential office believe that she may be called back to work at some point to deal with unresolved issues. Some of her key presidential senior secretaries are also likely to leave office during the same period. Her holiday destination has not been disclosed for security reasons. Military officials from South Korea and the U.S. will hold a 2-day high-level defense meeting starting Tuesday in Seoul.
The South Korean Defense Ministry officials said the biannual meeting will evaluate security threats posed by North Korea and issues related to wartime operational control transfer slated for December 2015. The talks come amid growing calls to push the date of the transfer of wartime operational control, largely due to continued nuclear and missile threats from North Korea. On the economic front, despite policymakers' rosy outlook last week that the economy will pick up steam in the second half of this year, more manufacturers in the nation feel pessimistic about the Korean economy.
Our economics correspondent Geunhye explains what's behind the contradiction.
Not many Korean manufacturers seem confident about the nation's nascent economic recovery. Only days after the government welcomed signs of recovery and promised steps to spur growth, the Bank of Korea said Monday that the business sentiment index for July remained subdued, coming in at 72, down from the 79 tallied a month earlier. The index that gauges manufacturers' expectations on business conditions dropped the most this month in a year. A reading below the benchmark 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. The central bank official said demand at home and abroad remained weak even after considering normally slow factory operations during the summer vacation season. The drop in business sentiment comes less than a week after the central bank said the economy grew at the fastest pace in 2 years in the second quarter of this year. The economy grew 1.1% in the April to June period from the previous quarter, rising above 1% for the first time in 9 quarters. Experts attribute the recovery in the second quarter largely to government stimulus measures and stress that weak overseas demand, particularly in China, is weighing on manufacturers' business sentiment.
Government policies affect investment, but the most important factor when deciding on investment is the level of demand. Companies will expand investment only when they think their products will sell well, but current conditions are very uncertain.
In the face of lackluster global demand, facilities investments declined in the second quarter of this year, reflecting the manufacturer's bleak outlook for the second half of this year. Geunhye, Arirang News.
Well, Korea's largest automotive group may not be among the pessimists. Hyundai Motor Group is on track for a banner year.
Right. U.S.-based market researcher LMC Automotive forecast Monday that Korea's largest auto manufacturer will record an all-time high in terms of global market share this year based on the number of cars sold. The Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Motor sold around 3.7 million vehicles in the first half of this year, giving it 8.8% of global market share. That is 0.2 percentage points higher compared to the same period last year, driven by demand in Europe and in countries like China and Brazil. Experts say the Hyundai Group is expected to pass the 9% mark by the end of the year, despite a drop of sales in the United States. The visiting Prime Minister of New Zealand, Geunhye, concluded a 5-day trip to Korea on Monday by holding a special luncheon for him in Seoul.
Prime Minister Key highlighted his views on some pending political and economic issues concerning Korea and the Pacific Island nation. Our Han Da-eun was there.
New Zealand Prime Minister Geunhye delivered a special speech to high-ranking Korean officials and prominent business figures at a luncheon forum on Monday. The Prime Minister, who arrived in Korea to mark the 60th year since the signing of the Korean Armistice Agreement, touched upon a wide range of issues. Beginning his speech by thanking war veterans, the leader expressed support for President Park Geun-hye's North Korea policy.
So in this regard, I applaud President Park's aspiration for peace and stability on the peninsula, including her efforts to reach out to North Korea. We reject North Korea's provocations. We call on them to commit firmly to abandon nuclear weapons.
Saying the relationship between South Korea and New Zealand has become increasingly significant ever since the Korean War, he highlighted the two nations' economic ties.
It's interesting that Korea is comfortably our 5th largest export market, but trade is highly complementary in nature.
He focused especially on the Korea-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, saying the deal would bring about prosperity for both sides. The leader brushed off worries that the FTA would hurt Korea's domestic agricultural sector, the main hurdle that derailed trade negotiations in 2010.
But of course, New Zealand doesn't really compete with a lot of the core and critical and sensitive issues around agriculture. So, for instance, we don't produce rice, and probably will never do so. Our conditions don't suit that.
Reports suggest that the two countries will resume FTA negotiations sometime this year. But whether the two sides will be able to narrow differences on the sticking points this time around remains to be seen. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions is on the rise.
closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature, circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Came on maneuver trying to cover up the South. Then moving now to an ongoing probe into the Asiana Airlines plane crash at San Francisco. Officials from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board will begin their 10-day investigation starting today at the headquarters of Asiana in Seoul. Meanwhile, the Chinese families who lost children in the accident have hired a leading American law firm to represent them. Kim Hyun-gil has been following the story.
The 10-day probe will be conducted by an investigative team comprised of 6 officials from the NTSB, 2 from the Federal Aviation Administration, and 2 from Boeing.
I'm here with a portion of my team of technical experts to continue the fact-gathering stage of our research into the accident.
The investigator declined to comment further on the investigation into the July 6th crash of the Boeing 777 plane, which killed 3 and left 180 injured.
Please, all other questions to Public Affairs in Washington. No questions here, please.
Korea's Transportation Ministry says the purpose of the U.S. visit is to confirm what they have found at the San Francisco crash site and compare details on the Asiana's operations. Working in collaboration with Korean investigators and Asiana Airlines officials, the American investigators will also examine Asiana's flight maintenance and pilot training programs. Meanwhile, the families of 3 Chinese teenage girls who were killed in the Asiana crash have hired a leading American law firm to represent them. Reuters reported last week that it is likely the families will file lawsuits against Asiana Airlines, the plane manufacturer Boeing, and the San Francisco Fire Department. The NTSB's final report on the crash of Asiana Flight 214 is expected to take at least a year. Kim Hyun-gil, Arirang News.
On the other side of the globe, another investigation is ongoing over a deadly train crash in Spain that killed at least 79 people. The driver has been charged with multiple counts of reckless homicide, while new reports are emerging that a safety system which could have helped prevent the derailment was not in place at the time of the accident. Kim Min-ji has the details.
The driver of the train, Francisco Garson, was released on bail on Sunday after reportedly admitting that he had behaved recklessly. But a judge has barred him from leaving Spain and ordered him to make regular appearances before the court. Garson is suspected of driving too fast through a tight curve. Video of the accident shows a high-speed Alvia train derailing as it turned into a bend near the northwestern city of Santiago de Compostela. The train was reportedly traveling at more than double the 80 km/h speed limit at the time of the crash. Authorities said that the high-speed trains are equipped with an automatic speed control system called the European Rail Traffic Management System, which automatically initiates the brakes on a train when it is going too fast. This system was installed on the train and also on most of the track along the route the train was on, but was not installed on the 5-kilometer stretch of track near the crash site, meaning the driver would have been responsible for controlling the speed as the train approached its destination. Eyewitness accounts indicate that Garson said he wanted to die rather than see the damage, and that he tried to slow down, but it was too late. The death toll from the crash was 79 as of Sunday, and at least 130 people have been injured in what has been the country's worst accident in decades. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Turning now to what could be a major breakthrough in the Middle East peace process. Negotiators from Israel and Palestine will meet for direct peace talks on Monday in Washington. Our Yu Lian reports on the easing of the diplomatic deadlock.
After months of intense shuttle diplomacy, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is taking a lot of credit for getting Israel and Palestine back to the table for peace talks. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki says the two countries accepted invitations from Kerry to formally resume negotiations. The talks are scheduled to take place in Washington from Monday evening to Tuesday between senior aides of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. This comes after Israel's cabinet on Sunday approved the release of 104 Palestinian prisoners. Netanyahu's proposal to release the prisoners, a plan he called a very painful decision, divided the cabinet, with 13 voting in favor and 7 against. Israel threw thousands of Palestinians into prison in the early 1990s for carrying out deadly attacks, and some of the prisoners that are due to be released have served around 30 years. The release of the prisoners remains a highly emotional one for both sides.
We can't express our feeling. Any human being will feel the same. For 20 years he has been in jail, which is the period of his youth. And we were prevented from visiting him, so we hope, God willing, to see him as soon as possible.
You don't release murderous terrorists. It's an indescribable crime, spitting in the face of the bereaved families and the Israeli people.
The prisoners will be freed in a minimum of 4 stages over a 9-month period. Yurian, Arirang News.
Now, Hong Myung-bo was supposed to breathe new life into the South Korean national football team when he was installed as manager a month ago, but the team is still winless under his watch.
SJ standing by at the Sports Center to tell us what's going on with the team. SJ.
Guys, 3 matches in the East Asian Cup, and Korea came away with 2 draws and then a loss against Japan on Sunday, finishing in 3rd place overall. Now, the defense looked great in the first 2 matches, but some weaknesses were exposed in yesterday's match against Japan. Now, Korea gave up 2 goals to Japan in the 2-1 loss, but the biggest issue was the lack of concentration in the backfield on the counterattacks. When Korea pushed to attack, their defense lost track of the opponents, giving up the 2 goals on the same mistakes. Now, manager Hong must work on balancing the team's attack and its defense in the future matches to come. And moving on, but staying with football, the former South Korean football team captain Park Ji-sung is headed out of Queen's Park Rangers and back to where he started in Europe. The 32-year-old midfielder left for Holland over the weekend for a medical test and has agreed to move to his former team, PSV Eindhoven, on loan. The loan will be for a year as the South Korean returns to the team where he played from 2002 to 2005 before moving over to Manchester United. Now, Park has been a long fan favorite with PSV, and he hopes to help the team get back into the UEFA Champions League. And now finishing things off in baseball, it's Monday, which means the KBO took the day off, so let's take this time to check out the current standings. Of course, taking a look here, first off, the Samsung Lions holding on to the first place lead for another week. The 2.5-game lead over the LG Twins, who are in 2nd place, with Nexon Heroes in 3rd, and the Tucson Bears in 4th place, 6 games behind Samsung. Now, of course, taking a look at the bottom half of the league, the Lotte Giants are in 5th place, just a game and a half behind the Tucson Bears, with the struggling Kia Tigers in 6th place. Meanwhile, no changes at the bottom of the standings, with SK, NC, and Hanwha pulling up the rear. Now, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. See you guys again after midnight for your sports needs.
Time to go over to our Kwon Soa at the Weather Center for the latest forecast. Soa, hello.
Hi, Jia, Sean. Do you guys remember when the monsoon season began this year?
That seems like ages ago, maybe sometime in June.
Yes, Sean. To be more specific, in mid-June, so much earlier than usual. However, the monsoon season seems to be ending later than usual, too.
And when will that be?
Well, it's said to be sometime in the beginning of August, and the monsoon front will be active tomorrow, too. Now, it'll begin to rain in the early morning in the southwestern regions, and then later in the afternoon in the west coast regions of Chungcheong province, and finally in the central regions at night. And those regions regions should expect heavy precipitation at times of up to 30 millimeters per hour through Wednesday morning, so please be on alert. Now, it's not going to get wet in the whole nation though, and unfortunately the hottest area, meaning Gyeongsang province, should stay dry, so temperatures could get dangerously high at the peak hours, so please be careful not to become a victim of heat stroke. In fact, if we go over to our numbers here, Daegu's daytime high should soar up to 35 degrees. Seoul, Gwangju, and Busan make it to the low 30s. And moving over to Daejeon and Jeju Island, which should both hit 33 degrees. Dokdo and Mongeumgang will be cooler in the 20s. And that's the forecast for now, but I hope to see you back here in around 2 hours after midnight.
Thank you, Soa. And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.